Welcome to the pre-application information session for the fiscal year 2023 Grants to Engage Men and Boys as Allies in the Prevention of Violence Against Women and Girls program, also referred to as the Engaging Men or EM program solicitation. The Office on Violence Against Women, also referred to as OVW, is hosting this webinar to go over the FY2023 solicitation for the Engaging Men program. My name is Elena Roberts, and I am one of the program specialists assigned to the EM program. I am joined today by my colleagues, Derek O'Leary and Tracy Rollins Johnson. Also on this webinar is the Children and Youth and Engaging Men Team Lead, Aisha Battle, and Associate Director, Krista Blakeney Mitchell, who oversees both the CYEM and rural programs. This session is being recorded and will be available on the OVW website. The purpose of the pre-application information session is to highlight key points in the solicitation. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect of the solicitation. All applicants are responsible for reading the FY23 EM solicitation and the OVW solicitation companion guide to ensure a complete application is submitted. Following this webinar, you may submit additional questions to the consolidated youth email at ovw.consol.youth, that's ovw.consol@usdoj.gov, or you may call 202-514-0390. Before we get started, you may find it helpful to have the EM solicitation in front of you for a point of reference during this information session. Please note the EM solicitation is one of two solicitations issued under the Consolidated Youth and Engaging Men Grant Program, also referred to as the CYEM program. The other solicitation is focused on serving children and youth impacted by domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking. This information session focuses solely on the Engaging Men solicitation. If you are interested in submitting an application for children and youth, please view the information session specifically for that solicitation. Today, we will cover a brief overview of the EM program, including what's new about the EM program and the submission process. We will highlight the important solicitation deadlines and briefly walk through the registration and submission process. Finally, we'll review the program requirements and unallowable activities, the optional Engaging Men program, and OVW priorities, and we will end the session with application tips and helpful contact information. If time permits, we will answer questions at the end of today's session. Next slide. The EM program supports projects that create educational programming and community organizing to encourage men and boys to work as allies with women and girls to prevent domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking. Within the EM program are 3 purpose areas with which applicants must choose one or more to focus their work. This year, there is a new Engaging Men program-specific priority focused on online harm and abuse. We will go over this more in just a few minutes. Also this year, there are no more web-based documents or surveys. Documents will be uploaded as attachments in the Just Grants system. Specifically, the data requested with application, which consists of the summary data sheet and the pre-award risk assessment questions, along with the budget, will be uploaded as attachments this year. Please see pages 18 and 26 of the solicitation for additional information. Though historically eligible to apply, we are also highlighting and encouraging urban Indian organizations and Native Hawaiian organizations to apply for funding. Finally, the CYEM program commits to prioritizing training and technical assistance to applicants, particularly those from culturally specific organizations or who represent underserved populations and propose to address one or both OVW priority areas, but who do not receive funding in FY23. Let's begin by highlighting the deadlines. Applications are due in justgrants.gov by 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, March 28, 2023. The Justice Grants System, also known as Just Grants, is the system through which the Department of Justice receives applications for and awards federal funding. OVW will not accept late submissions except under limited circumstances as described in the OVW policy on late submission requests due to severe inclement weather or natural or man-made disaster section of the solicitation, which is pages 34 through 35. You should register with sam.gov by March 1st, 2023, and apply for a universal entity identifier. You will also need to register with grants.gov by March 24th, 2023. For returning applicants, you should ensure your Universal Entity Identifier, or UEI, and SAM, S-A-M, registrations have not expired. Let's walk through these processes with a little more detail. To apply for a federal award with the Department of Justice, there are 3 critical registrations you must complete in order to successfully submit an application. First, every applicant must obtain a Universal Entity Identifier, referred to as a Universal Entity ID or UEI, in order to apply for federal funding. This is obtained by registering in the System for Award Management, commonly known as SAM. And this is done on the sam.gov website. As of April 4th, 2022, any registrants with SAM, whether active or not, no longer have a Data Universal Number or a DUNS number. These have been transitioned to the UEI, and this is what is used going forward. Please note, for any registrants in SAM, the average registration completion time is 2 to 3 weeks. Additionally, first-time applicants must also register in grants.gov and Just Grants. Average registration completion time for grants.gov is 1 week. These are only estimated times, and they all must be completed before you can upload your application in Just Grants. OVW strongly encourages applicants to start the registration process as early as possible. Please see the solicitation companion guide for additional details regarding SAM, grants.gov, and Just Grants registration. My colleagues will drop this link into the chat now. You can also find the guide on the OVW site under Resources for Applicants. These are pictures of what the websites for sam.gov and grants.gov look like. When you are on the sam.gov website, you will see a box to the right titled Register Your Entity or Get a Unique Entity ID. You can get started, renew entity, or check entity status. There are also several helpful resources. My colleagues will drop the sam.gov and grants.gov links into the chat for you, along with resources from the sam.gov site called DOJ Application Submission Checklist, which walks you through the SAM and grants.gov registration process and explains what needs to be done or uploaded under each one. One of those instructions is regarding an email notification from grants.gov prompting you to log into Just Grants. At the end of this session, we will provide helpful contact information should you experience any issues with the registration process. Please read the submission information on page 2 of the solicitation. Applicants are strongly encouraged to review the entire solicitation, including any links, as early as possible to ensure sufficient time to not only prepare the application, but to also complete the submission process by March 28, 2023 at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. When you are ready to apply, applicants may find this funding opportunity on grants.gov using the CFDA number 16.888 and the grants.gov opportunity number O-OVW-2023-171498, or the title of the solicitation, which can be found on the cover page of the solicitation. The FY2023 application submission process is a multi-step process and involves multiple systems. Please note that application materials will be submitted in grants.gov and Just Grants. We strongly encourage starting the application process as early as possible to allow time to learn the system and the process. To begin the submission process, applicants will first submit the application for federal assistance, also called the SF-424, and the disclosure of lobbying activities, called the SFLLL, forms in grants.gov. After submitting these forms in grants.gov, the applicant will receive an email notification from Just Grants to complete the remainder of the application in Just Grants. If the applicant is a new user in Just Grants, the email will include instructions on registering with Just Grants. Remember, you will not be able to submit an application until you are registered in sam.gov, have obtained a unique entity ID, UEI, and have submitted the SF-424 and SFLLL in grants.gov. These steps must be done before Just Grants will generate an email for you to complete and submit your Engaging Men application in Just Grants. In FY23, the application documents will be uploaded as attachments. This is different than the last few years for those of you who may have applied for other funding and used the web-based forms. Specifically, the proposal abstract, proposal narrative, budget worksheet, and budget narrative, the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, the summary data sheet, and the pre-award risk assessment will each be drafted by the applicant and uploaded as attachments. Please read each section and its requirements carefully to ensure you are responsive to the solicitation and program requirements for each element. Additional information related to the submission process can be found on page 33 of the solicitation. Just Grants has developed tools and trainings to assist applicants with submitting an application. To access these, visit the Just Grants website and click the Trainings tab at the top. My colleagues will also drop the resources on the Just Grants training site into the chat now. Scroll down to view the training modules and click the Application Submission module. This is a screenshot of what you should see when you are on the training page. Please refer to pages 33 through 35 of the solicitation if you experience technical difficulties. While you reach out to the respective agencies for help, please continue to work on your application, writing, gathering all the necessary information so that you are ready to submit when the issue is resolved. We cannot stress enough how important it is to give yourself plenty of time to work through the systems and submit your application. One final reminder that the submission deadline is 9 p.m. Eastern on March 28, 2023. Now let's turn to the programmatic aspects. The grant award period for the Engaging Men program is for 36 months and begins October 1, 2023 and ends September 30th, 2026. Applicants should submit applications with project activities and budgets that reflect this period. Applicants may request up to $350,000. And OVW anticipates notifying all applicants of funding decisions by October 1, 2023. Please see page 10 for more information. Eligibility is mentioned on the cover of the solicitation, as well as on page 14. Eligible applicants are limited to nonprofit, non-governmental entities, including community-based organizations, and culturally specific organizations, such as urban Indian organizations and Native Hawaiian organizations, tribal organizations, Indian tribal governments, and units of local government or agencies of units of local government in the United States or U.S. territories. Foreign entities and programs and institutions of higher education, regardless of nonprofit status, are not eligible for funding under the EM program. Recipients and partners or subrecipients of CYEM funding in years 2021 or 2022 are not eligible to apply as the lead applicant or as a partner or subrecipient on any 2023 Engaging Men applications. Applications submitted by ineligible entities or that do not meet the program requirements may not be considered for funding. When you are thinking about your proposal, please remember that any proposed project must support only local, community-specific strategies. Additionally, the applicant and its required project partners must be based in the project service area. Grant funds may not be used to conduct or support regional or statewide activities or projects. Both new and continuation applications are accepted. New applications are those that have never received funding under the Consolidated Grant Program to address children and youth experiencing domestic and sexual assault and engaging men and boys as allies, CYEM, or whose funding under the CYEM program expired on or before March 28th of 2022. Continuation applications are those that have an existing or CYEM award that closed after March 28th of 2022. Applicants may apply to both the CY and EM solicitations, but will only receive funding under one. Current grantees with 50% or more of unobligated funds remaining as of March 31st, 2023 may not be considered for funding, or if selected for funding, may receive a reduced amount of funding for FY23 and or a shorter award period. See page 11 for more information. The purpose areas for the EM program can be found on page 6 of the solicitation. Applicants may select one or more of the purpose areas to address in the proposed project. The activities described in the proposal narrative and the budget should be reflective of the selected purpose area. Applicants who choose Purpose Area 1 will develop and or implement programming to recruit and train men and boys to serve as role models, positive influencers, change agents, and or mentors to address and prevent domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or sex trafficking. Applicants who choose Purpose Area 2 will integrate education on domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or sex trafficking into established support and/or enrichment programs to assist men and/or boys in developing healthy relationships, challenging social norms that support violence against women and girls, becoming active bystanders, and understanding the intersection of the above crimes with other types of violence. Applicants who choose Purpose Area 3 will develop and implement a Train the Trainer program for community organizations or programs and/or governmental agencies or programs to incorporate education or training into their existing work with male clients to prevent violence against women and girls. Before moving on, I want to provide you with a few helpful hints to assist you in submitting a strong application. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. First, applicants must choose at least one purpose area to address in their project. Applicants choosing more than one should ensure their proposed project fully addresses the requirements for each purpose area that's chosen. A common mistake we see with applications for the EM program are projects that focus solely on primary prevention education. While this is important, the focus of the EM program is to actively bring men and boys into the prevention work. Strong proposals will include a clear call to action as to how men and boys can become active allies in the prevention of violence against women and girls. Please refer to pages 12 through 13 of the solicitation for additional requirements under each purpose area that you must address in your proposal. As I mentioned earlier, the CYEM program has seen a rise in youth experiencing online harm and abuse. Therefore, we are designating this as a program priority for the EM program. Applicants who address online harm and abuse in their proposed activities will receive special consideration during the recommendation process. What this means is that OVW has the discretion to recommend a lower scoring application for funding if it addresses this priority in the activities. Please note that you are not required to address this priority. Additionally, each year, OVW identifies specific topics or issues related to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking that the office will focus on. Again, applicants may choose to incorporate one or more of the priority areas into their proposal. Applicants proposing projects to address a priority area will be given special consideration during the recommendation process. And again, this means that OVW has discretion to recommend a lower scoring application for funding if it meaningfully addresses one or more of the priority areas. This year, the priorities are: 1, advance racial equity as an essential component of ending sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sex trafficking. 2, improve outreach, services, civil and criminal justice responses, prevention, and support for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sex trafficking. Please note, applicants are not required to address a priority area. It is optional. A common mistake that we see in applications that claim to address a priority area is that they do not include all of the requirements of the priority area in the proposal narrative. This results in a lower score during peer review. So, if you do choose to include one or more of the priority areas in your proposed project, be certain you have fully reviewed the requirements listed for each requirement and that your proposal narrative and budget clearly include activities, strategies, and partnerships to address the specific priority area. Please see the mandatory program requirements on page 13, as well as MOU requirements on page 31. The EM program is committed to prioritizing training and technical assistance to applicants, particularly those from culturally specific organizations or who represent underserved populations, and propose to address one or both priority areas, but who do not receive funding in FY 2023. Shifting back to the requirements under the EM program, one very important requirement for every applicant are the partnerships. Each proposal must have at least one agency serving as the victim service provider and one agency serving as the community-based organization with a demonstrated experience of providing support, enrichment, and/or leadership development, programming that focuses on men or boys. Applicants and partners are limited to serving in one role for application proposal purposes. This is regardless of whether an organization identifies as being both a victim service provider and community-based organization. This is very important and will disqualify you if you either do not meet this requirement or it is not clear that you have two organizations to fulfill the two roles. We have disqualified applicants based on not having met the partnership requirements, or if it was not clear at the time of review who was serving in which role. Please be very clear in identifying in your proposal and the summary data sheet which agency is serving as the victim service provider and which agency as the community-based organization. Two examples of what the required partnerships may look like are: first, a victim service provider submitted an application to develop a program for men in the immigrant community to become leaders in their neighborhoods by teaching young boys bystander intervention skills. Since the applicant is a victim service provider, the required partner for this project will be a culturally specific or population specific community-based organization that provides support, enrichment, or leadership development programming for men or boys. The community-based organization is not a victim service provider, but they possess the expertise and access necessary for the victim service provider to engage with the men and boys in the immigrant community that will be participating in the project. The second example is a community-based organization that provides a fatherhood program for men in the community. The proposed project will integrate training and education on domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking into the existing program to empower men to be allies in preventing violence against women. Because the community-based organization does not have the same expertise that a victim service provider would have related to the aforementioned crimes, they must partner with a victim service provider. Please refer to page 15 for the definition of a victim service provider in the solicitation. Another requirement of the EM program is the development of a coordinated community response, also known as a CCR. Because of this, applicants are encouraged to have more than the required partnerships. These should be multidisciplinary partnerships documented in the MOU to ensure the proposed project has the necessary expertise, experience, and capacity to engage men and boys as allies in preventing violence against women. The CCR team should represent the community being addressed in the proposal and include community-based organizations that meet the needs of that community and help achieve the proposed goals and objectives. A sample MOU can be found on the OVW website. My colleagues will drop the link into the chat now for you. Next, I am going to review some of the mandatory program requirements for all applications. Applicants that receive funding under the EM program are required to engage in and provide certain activities throughout the award period. I am going to highlight just a few. The full list of mandatory program requirements is on pages 11 and 12 of the solicitation. Please read these carefully and make sure your proposed project includes each of the mandatory requirements. Failure to address each of the mandatory requirements in the project narrative may result in a deduction of points during the peer review or programmatic review process. Grantees are required to participate in OVW-sponsored training and technical assistance, including the new grantee orientation. All grantees must participate in the technical assistance events and activities organized and supported by the EM program designated technical assistance providers. This includes, but is not limited to, monthly or quarterly conference and telephone calls, site visits, in-person training institutes, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, and web-based trainings. Applicants are required to set aside $30,000 to $40,000 of their total budgets for this requirement. I will go over this in more detail in the budget section. Next, create or expand a coordinated community response team to develop and guide the proposed project. The CCR must meet regularly and be representative of the community to be served through the project. All projects must provide crisis intervention for participants at all educational, outreach, and training events. The person that provides the crisis intervention must not be the facilitator. This person must be available to participants if they are triggered or wish to speak with someone during the event, not just after the event. The person providing this service must be trained in crisis intervention per the organization or state licensing or training requirements. Next, all projects must cross-train project staff, project partners, and CCR team members. This means that victim service providers will be providing training and education on the violence against women crimes and the impact on survivors to other members of the project and vice versa. Community organizations or other programs will be providing training and education to the victim service providers on working and engaging with men and boys. All funded projects have an initial planning phase prior to implementing the full scope of the proposed project. The planning phase is approximately 6 months for new grantees and 3 months for continuation grantees. During the planning phase, new grantees will be conducting a limited community needs and strengths assessment that's specific to the proposed project and design a strategic plan for implementation of the project. Before moving to the next section, it is important to note that all the activities listed on pages 11 and 12 are required. However, applicants may and are encouraged to add additional activities beyond what is required, so long as they are within the scope of the program and are an allowable activity. All applications must include the following 3 components: a proposal narrative, a budget detail worksheet and narrative, and a memorandum of understanding, also called the MOU. Applications that do not include these 3 components will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. Each of these components is scored during peer review. The proposal narrative consists of 3 sections: the purpose of the proposal, what will be done, and who will implement. All combined, the proposal narrative is worth a total of 70 points, and it is the bulk of the application. This is where applicants provide detailed information related to the proposed project. Before I get into each section of the narrative, it is important to discuss the page limit. It is imperative that you are mindful of the formatting and the number of allowable pages. Peer reviewers are instructed to stop reading and scoring the section at the page number cutoff. You do not want to lose valuable points due to going over the page limit or not following the formatting requirements. Each year, I have seen excellent applications fall below the funding cutoff score for not adhering to the format requirements. The project narrative should be no more than 15 pages, double-spaced, and the type should be no smaller than 12-point font. Times New Roman or Arial font should be used, and include page numbers in the proposal narrative. First, the purpose of the proposal. This is worth 10 points. This section describes the need for the project and helps reviewers understand your community. Common mistakes include providing too much information, information that is not relevant to the proposed project, or not enough information to be responsive to what is being asked. Follow the guidance on pages 23 and 24 of the solicitation to ensure you are providing the required information. Also keep in mind, this section counts towards your page limit. You want to be sure you are being responsive to the questions in this section, while at the same time ensuring you have enough pages remaining to provide detailed information on the proposed project. I have seen applications where the applicant used more pages to describe the need for the project than the number of pages used to describe the actual project activities to address the problem. Strong applications strike a balance between justifying the need and providing detailed information on how that need will be addressed. The what will be done section is worth 40 points. This is the section where you will describe what you are going to do with the grant funds. You should provide detailed information that clearly describes the activities and strategies to support your proposed project. The goals and objectives should be clear and detailed so reviewers understand how the proposed activities meet the needs identified and the program requirements. For example, there is a difference between stating, "We will train men," and "We will train 15 men to serve as trainers in bystander intervention for the boys at the local community youth center." In addition to the 11 items that must be addressed in this section, each purpose area also has specific criteria that needs to be addressed. Be certain to include the information requested for the specific purpose area or areas, as well as the priority area or areas, if applicable, that your application will be addressing in the proposed project as identified on the summary data sheet. Some common mistakes to avoid in this section include not providing a description of products to be developed or purchased with grant funds. If products such as brochures, videos, billboards, or curriculums are mentioned in this section, there should be a line item for them included in the budget, and vice versa. Not describing how products or services will be tailored to meet the needs of a specific population to be served. Example, age groups, culturally specific populations, population specific, different types of audiences for training and education. Be sure you are describing how you will tailor to meet the needs of each specific population you propose to address. Not including activities and strategies that will be developed and implemented to meet the OVW priority area that the applicant has identified on the summary data sheet. Remember, the priority area is optional and no points are deducted for not addressing it. However, points will be deducted if a priority area is identified and there are no supporting activities provided in the what will be done section. Finally, for continuation applications, not providing details on how the newly proposed project expands or enhances the current or last project. Please be sure to include information on that if you're a continuation applicant. The last part of the proposal narrative is the who will implement. This is worth 20 points. In this section, the applicant should identify who the key individuals and organizations that will be involved in the proposed project are. This section must demonstrate that the individuals and organizations identified have the capacity to address the stated need and can successfully implement the proposed project activities. As a reminder, this section is also part of your page limit, and you will want to keep this section focused on who is involved in the major project activities and who is most responsible for ensuring the goals and objectives of the proposed project are met. During the peer review process, the peer reviewers will be reviewing and scoring the budgets to ensure that they meet program requirements and do not include any unallowable activities or expenses. It is the applicant's responsibility to read this section thoroughly in order to submit a proper budget. Pages 26 through 29 of the solicitation provide detailed information on how to develop and submit your budget for your project. Unlike last year, applicants will complete their budget offline and upload it as an attachment in the budget section of the application. All applicants must include funds specifically for OVW mandated technical assistance and travel costs. The EM program has a dedicated team of technical assistance providers specifically for providing comprehensive technical assistance and training for grantees. All EM grantees are required to attend and participate in the technical assistance events. Projects located in the lower US must allocate $30,000, and projects located in the US territories, Hawaii, or Alaska must allocate $40,000. Applicants should plan to send at least 4 individuals involved in their project to 3 OVW mandated technical assistance trainings each year. That is a total of 9 training events over the award period. In addition to the training events, grantees are required to send a minimum of 3 individuals to the new grantee orientation. This funding may not be used for any other travel or training, and any remaining funds in this section will be returned to OVW at the end of the award period. If applicants are interested in attending conferences or other trainings to increase their team's skills and knowledge, or reimburse for local travel, additional funding outside of the $30,000 or $40,000 should be set aside for those specific purposes. The budget should also include funds to ensure project activities and materials are accessible to individuals with disabilities. For example, videos can be closed captioned and translated into other languages. Written materials can be translated into different languages. Interpreters can be made available at events for those who are deaf, hard of hearing, or speak a language other than English. Next, the budget should include funds to compensate all project partners for their contribution to the project, including attendance at EM technical assistance events. The exception to this is if a project partner is a state, local, tribal, or territorial agency and the activities they would be responsible for in the project are within their regular scope of work. An example of this would be a program manager at the Department of Parks and Recreation who runs an after-school program for youth. Because this is within the normal scope of work of the project manager and the Department of Parks and Recreation, this grant could not compensate them for the activity. However, you could designate grant funds to compensate them for mileage to and from the CCR meeting, travel costs associated with attending the OVW mandated TA trainings, as well as participating in after-hour events. Next, I want to highlight spending limits on media buys. No more than 10% of the total funding may be used for media buys, such as billboards, radio or TV public service announcements, bus or subway advertisements. In some circumstances, the budget is reviewed independently of the full application. Therefore, it is important that the budget narrative be as comprehensive as possible and describe in detail each line item in the budget. A strong budget and budget narrative should provide enough information to understand the proposed project without having to refer back to the project narrative. Next, the MOU. Page 31 provides detailed information on what is required to be included in the MOU. I encourage you to review this carefully when creating your MOU to ensure that you are meeting all of the requirements. In the past, I have seen applications miss the cutoff score by a point because information was missing from the MOU. Some common mistakes that can result in point deductions include submitting multiple MOUs. The MOU for this program should be one document. You can have multiple signature pages so long as the names and titles of everyone signing the agreement are included on each page. We also see MOUs that do not address each of the requirements in the solicitation. Like the budget, the MOU may be reviewed separately from the full application. So it is important to include all of the requested information, even if you've addressed it elsewhere. We often see missing signatures, especially the signatures of the required partners. Every person or organization listed in the MOU must also sign the document. Finally, submitting an outdated or irrelevant MOU. The MOU must be current. It must be responsive to the solicitation requirements and include only those activities that are listed in the proposal narrative. For this program, the MOU will be a new document drafted specifically for the proposed project by the applicant in coordination with the project partners. Please note, OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. The solicitation companion guide contains a list of these activities. You can find the solicitation companion guide again on the OVW website under resources for applicants. It was also dropped in the chat earlier in the session. I am not going to review the list extensively. Instead, to assist you with submitting a strong application, I'm going to go over some of the ones that have caused past applicants to receive point deductions during peer review. First, project designs and budgets that fail to account for the access needs of individuals with disabilities, with limited English proficiency, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. Peer reviewers usually deduct points off the budget and budget narrative for applications that do not designate funding for how applicants will make their services or products accessible to individuals with disabilities. Next, failing to mention that you already have or will be developing policies regarding confidentiality, parental involvement or consent, mandatory reporting, information sharing, and background checks. This is another one that peer reviewers routinely deduct points for during the peer review process. Having these policies in place not only protects the safety of the victim, but also enhances the working relationship between service providers. Do not assume peer reviewers will know that these policies exist because you are a victim service provider. They are looking for proof that they do exist or that they will be developed. And the only way for them to know this is if they read it in your project narrative. Finally, failing to provide information about crisis intervention support during project activities and outreach events. That must be addressed in your proposed narrative. OVW and the EM program have specific out-of-scope activities that cannot be supported with grant funds. To assist with submitting a strong application, I am going to go over some of the ones that have caused past applicants to receive point deductions during the peer review process. Please review the full list of out-of-scope activities on page 9 of the solicitation prior to writing your application to ensure that you do not include any of the listed activities in your proposed project. First, direct victim services. This specific grant program is a prevention-based program. It does not allow for the delivery of victim services. If you are interested in providing direct victim services, you should consider applying for the Children and Youth program. Next, perpetrator services. Grant funds may not be used to provide support services or for perpetrators of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, such as counseling, batters intervention, or any anger management programs. Next, sexual harassment, bullying, and hazing. Grant funds may not be used to develop or provide training, products, or policies that focus primarily on sexual harassment, bullying, or hazing. OVW recognizes that these issues are serious and can be traumatic experiences. We also understand the intersection with the violence against women crimes and sexual harassment, bullying, and hazing. However, grant funds must be used to address the VAWA crimes and sex trafficking only. To avoid possible point deductions, applicants should refrain from including activities or strategies that address sexual harassment, bullying, and hazing without addressing an intersection to the VAWA crimes. Next, ceremonies, celebrations, and entertainment. Grant funds may not be used to support award ceremonies or other celebratory events, or the purchase of tickets for entertainment activities such as sporting events, movies, concerts, or museums. For example, grant funds may not be used to fund a graduation celebration for the participants of an 8-week mentoring program. Another example is that grant funds may not be used to pay for the transportation and lunches for a group of boys to visit a local art center. Next, athletics. Grant funds may not be used to pay the salaries for coaches. Grant funds may be used to support a portion of a coach's salary. Excuse me, one moment. I've been doing a lot of talking in a very strong and high voice. My apologies. So going back, grant funds may not be used to pay the coaches, the salaries for coaches, but they can be used to support a portion of a coach's salary that's specific to the time spent on project activities. For example, coaches may receive training to prevent sexual assault or dating violence on the team or by team members. This could be supported with grant funds. Another example is a coach may provide prevention education to the team members. The time spent delivering this education to the team could be supported with grant funds. Grant funds may not be used to support an individual's participation on an athletic team or event. It may not be used to buy uniforms or pay for transportation to and from games. Grant funds may be used to transport a team to a prevention education training, though. Next, technical assistance, or TA. Grant funds may not be used for the provision of technical assistance, or TA, to other entities. This includes project partners. The distinction here is that the EM program requires grantees to engage in cross-training activities where the grantee, project partners, and member organizations of the larger CCR are providing training to one another. It is best to refrain from using the term technical assistance when referencing this training in the project narrative and budget. Instead, refer to it as training or education. Finally, the service area. Grant funds may not be used to conduct or support regional or statewide activities. All applicants must ensure that proposed projects support community-specific activities and strategies only. In the past, there have been applications removed for further review because the proposed project was a statewide or national initiative. To avoid having this happen to you, please ensure your project is focused to a specific community. The summary data sheet also requests this information, so please be specific in your response to that question, as well as in your proposal. Some examples of activities that are not community-based and could result in point deductions include national or statewide podcasts that will be developed, organizing or presenting at regional, statewide, or national conferences, and educational or awareness campaigns that have been developed for regional, statewide, or national distribution. Next, I'm going to go over some tips that may improve your chances on becoming an EM grant recipient. The following list is not a guarantee that you will be funded, but it is intended to assist you with submitting a strong and responsive application. First, read the solicitation. I have not reviewed every section of the solicitation, so please read it. As I have mentioned, it is the applicant's responsibility to read the solicitation in its entirety. Everything that needs to be included in or with your application is mentioned in the solicitation, including the supporting resources and links that are referenced in the solicitation for you. For an application to be considered complete and move to the next review process, it must include the 3 components of a proposal narrative, a budget worksheet and narrative, and an MOU. MOUs that do not contain signatures may receive point deductions from the peer reviewers. Be sure your project strategies and activities address the areas you have identified on the summary data sheet. It is okay for projects to focus on one crime, such as sex trafficking or dating violence. It does not increase your chances of being awarded a grant by stating that you will address every crime. A strong application is focused on the crimes, population, and purpose area or areas if you're doing more than one, and the priority areas if you choose to do one, that are stated in the summary data sheet. If you are submitting a continuation application, please be sure your project is building upon what you have already accomplished with the last award. A continuation project should not simply be a continuation of the same activities. Please demonstrate growth or expansion, or be able to articulate the reason or reasons why you are proposing the same activities. Finally, use the application checklist on page 41 of the solicitation. This checklist will help ensure all required documents are included in your application when you begin the submission process. Tips continued as we keep going for you. Please allow plenty of time to gather the required information, especially the signatures on the MOU. Remember, the MOU may have multiple signature pages so long as every individual signing the MOU is listed on each page. To avoid any possibility of missing the submission deadline, submit your application as far in advance of the deadline as possible. Technical issues may and sometimes do arise, and the number of individuals seeking assistance from grants.gov and Just Grants increases on or near the submission date. Make the application easy to read and follow. Make the application easy to read and follow for all of the reviewers. Use the heading and subheading titles that are in the solicitation for each section. Be sure the application and responses to the program requirements and expectations are complete and clearly written. Avoid using acronyms. Remember, the reviewers are not familiar with your community, and they may not be familiar with the acronyms your organization and project partners may use. Print out the application before submitting it to ensure appropriate formatting and adherence to page limit requirements. Also, please number the pages in your application. Finally, if your name and contact information is listed as the point of contact or POC, please monitor your inbox, including your spam folder. These are times that the system may reject your application, and you will need to make sure you are getting any of those alerts. In the next couple of slides, we are going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents our financial team, the grants Financial Management Division, or GFMD, reviews. We'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior year's applications that can help with expediting their review process. I am only going to highlight certain aspects going forward, particularly of the pre-award risk assessment, and provide you with a link to a detailed webinar on how to provide the budget that will be included in your application. First, we'll highlight the items identified in the summary data sheet, which is completed by all applicants and uploaded in Just Grants. The list of questions began on page 20 of the solicitation under the heading Summary Data Sheet. Two items that GFMD would like for me to discuss with you are the single audit response and the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure. First, the single audit response. This is question number 3 on the summary data sheet. OVW requires all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they indicate this and specify the end date of their last fiscal year. GFMD is finding that applicants do not always include all of this information. Please ensure this question is answered in its entirety when you're answering the questions for the summary data sheet. Next is a question specifically for nonprofit organizations. This is question number 5. If the applicant is a nonprofit and you use the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you are required to provide a disclosure letter. The next item is the pre-award risk assessment questions. This assists GFMD during the pre-award risk assessment review for all applications. The pre-award risk assessment questions begin on page 18 of the solicitation. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions. Please note that each question has multiple parts to it. GFMD has noticed from prior years that applicants do not always fully answer all parts of the pre-award risk assessment questions, which in turn requires them to reach out to the applicant and may delay funding decisions. Some of the most common issues encountered have been, for example, with question number 2, where the applicant indicates that they do have internal policies, but then they don't provide a brief list of topics covered in the policies and procedures. On question number 3, some applicants fail to provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. These are just a few examples, but in general, please make sure that you read each component under every question and provide a full and comprehensive response. Both the summary data sheet and pre-award risk assessment questions must be uploaded in the section with your proposal narrative. This is a screenshot of where you will upload. If we could go to the next slide. Yep, this is a screenshot of where you will upload the pre-award risk assessment, the summary data sheet, and the proposal narrative. You will see that these are actually uploaded under the narrative proposal section. It's a little blurry, but where the yellow check mark is on the right, it says proposal narrative. All three of these get uploaded in that section. Finally, this slide highlights several resources available to assist applicants with completing and submitting an application. Some of these have already been dropped in the chat. OVW has resources for applicants on our site, which includes the Solicitation Companion Guide for FY2023. That link was dropped in the chat earlier. There is also a Just Grants submission guide that we will drop into the chat now. The uniform guidance found at 2 CFR Part 200 can be helpful as you draft your budgets. The link is being dropped in the chat now. And GFMD has developed a detailed webinar to assist applicants in developing the budget for their grant applications. This webinar provides some insight as to what OVW financial staff considers during their review of your budget. My colleagues will drop the link into the webinar chat now for this webinar. You can also find the recording under the budget information link on OVW's homepage. It's called Creating a Budget. That's the name of the webinar. If you haven't already viewed the EM solicitation, you can find it on the OVW site under the Open Solicitations tab. That link is being dropped into the chat now. So with that, we are at the end of this presentation. We know that this is a lot of information to process. And if we could just have that last slide with our contact information. Perfect. We know this is a lot of information. If you have questions related to the solicitation that were not addressed in the session, please reach out to the following. Questions regarding the EM program should be directed to the CYEM unit. This includes mandatory requirements, OVW priority areas, allowable activities, and late submission requests. That email, as I stated before, is ovw.consol, that's CONSOL, youth, YOUTH, at usdoj.gov. If you have questions that are related to the financial aspect, the budget, the pre-award risk assessment, anything financial, please reach out to the GFMD help desk. And that email is ovw.gfmd@usdoj.gov. And finally, questions related to technical issues with either grants.gov or just grants, you can reach out to support@grants.gov. And for just grants, it's ovw.justgrantsupport@usdoj.gov. And I am going to double check that I did not maybe leave an S off of the support for grants.gov. These resources are listed in the solicitation, so please refer to the solicitation if you are having issues. Please note that OVW staff cannot comment on the quality of an applicant's proposed project or proposed activities. So if you reach out asking us about an idea that you have, we will not be able to comment on it. I want to thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you for your interest in the Engaging Men and Boys program, and we will now answer questions in the remaining few minutes. Let's see, how we did this last time was if folks were tracking them in the chat, you can let me know, or folks can just use the raise your hand option and I will call on you and you can take yourself off mute. I already see a question. Are we required to compensate every partner in RCCR? No, you are not required to. Project partners should be equitably compensated for the work that they are doing, but that may not include all of the partners on your MOU. And as I stated before, if you have organizations funded to do work that, you know, is very similar to what they would be doing on your proposed project, then they probably can't double dip, so to speak, right? So they wouldn't be able to take your funding in certain instances. All right, go ahead and raise your hands. You see that my colleagues were answering some of the questions. Any other remaining questions? Okay, I see a hand up. It looks like Sean. If you want to go ahead.
Yes.
And
yes, ma'am. Thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to clarify that you said with this particular grant, this one does not support giving direct services to males. And if that's what one of our models are, we should look at doing the youth one you stated. I just wanted to clarify that.
Right. So this program does not support direct services to victims or children of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, sexual assault, sex trafficking. That's not to say you wouldn't be providing support in other ways to raise up awareness, to have you know, healthy masculinity trainings or discussions. But what we're referring to specifically is like a victim service agency that provides direct services to victims or their children. The funds can't be used for that.
Okay, but it can be used for education and preventative services for people who batters.
So yes to the first part, but just to be clear, the other prohibition is that we can't use grant funds to support perpetrators or offenders. So we wouldn't be able to support training or counseling groups for men who were perpetrators of the abuse.
They just for the preventive and the education component, correct?
The prevention and education component should be based for your community and the men and boys in your community, but it should not be directed at perpetrators of abuse. So you wouldn't want to hold a training for men who have been convicted of or have protection orders against them to come in and hear a training. This is to train up more like, it depends on your purpose area, but mentors and allies and prevention work. I hope that helps. Okay, great.
It did. Thank you very much. Thanks for the clarification.
You're so welcome. What other questions do you all have? You have us here now. It's a great opportunity. Yes, Rebecca.
My question is about working with incarcerated or formerly incarcerated men.
Whether that can be supported?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to see exactly what you were proposing and the, what purpose area you were going to address. But formerly incarcerated folks are not off the bat, out of scope. So they could be coming back in for violence prevention in the community, having kind of been on the other side, right? So sometimes they can be a really important voice to bring in on why, how they changed their lives, why this, why violence against women and unhealthy masculinity norms need to change. So that's absolutely allowable. Again, it just, how are you bringing that into the purpose area?
Thank you.
And I see a question. Do youth who are in, oh, there's more. Okay, wait. Do youth who are in custody of DYS, Kate, can you tell me DYS, detentional youth?
Sorry, yeah, in Massachusetts, it's the Department of Youth Services. So it's, for people who are minors but have been engaged in criminal activity. So they're not going to jail, they're going to DYS custody.
Do they count as incarcerated? It's not so much a distinction between being incarcerated or not, or having a conviction, as much as it is people who are currently, doing teen dating violence, doing domestic violence, people who are under the supervision of probation or parole, or, it's more about that we're not going to be providing counseling services to them or any type of programming specifically for them. But certainly, again, I think similar to what I was saying before, if the youth want to come in and say, I've changed my life, I've turned it around, and I want to be an ally, and then they go, maybe you have a youth action committee, and they go and speak to other youth about why this isn't good, then that may be allowable. I always hate to say it depends, but it just depends on how you're going to propose it. But you should not be going in and providing, counseling or domestic violence services to those that have been incarcerated or undergoing any type of other treatment.
Okay, thank you.
And I see Jack wrote, does the estimated 350,000 ceiling represent 36 months combined or a fiscal year total? Thank you, Jack. This came up in our last session. The 350,000 represents the full 36 months. And so whatever your activities and what you're including in your budget and budget narrative, that 350 should extend over the course of 1, 2, and 3 years. Great questions, everyone. And I see that my colleagues did such a great job. Well, we are 5 minutes before the top of the hour. So if there are no other questions, I will give that time back to you all. But please feel free to reach out to us or the financial division. We are here to support you. And again, we want to thank you for joining us. We want to thank Leidos and our interpreters for being here. We have been on for many hours today, so huge thank you for all of the work that went into doing this.